The clink of silverware and muted conversation returned to the restaurant. But at Grace's table, the silence between the three of them carried more weight than the noise surrounding them. Ronan didn't speak again right away. He sat still, one hand resting on the table, the other loosely curled around his glass. Grace noticed he hadn't touched his drink. Not once. She wasn't sure if that meant he was thinking judging, or simply waiting for this strange moment to collapse under its own absurdity. Margot, on the other hand, appeared entirely at ease. She buttered a piece of baguette like she did this every Tuesday. So she said, voice light, "Shall we order? You do like sea bass, don't you, Grace?" Yes. I do, Grace said carefully, as if saying the wrong thing might undo the spell. Ronan raised an eyebrow. "We're ordering." "Yes," Margot replied without even glancing at him. "You know how I feel about good food and wasted evenings." Grace opened her mouth, then closed it again. She felt like she was on a stage in a play she hadn't rehearsed for, but somehow everyone around her knew their lines. Ronan turned to Grace. "Do you always agree to spontaneous fake marriages over dinner, or am I the exception?" She smiled faintly. "Only when the mother-in-law is this persuasive." His eyes searched hers, quiet, focused, with the kind of gaze that didn't dart around to avoid discomfort. He looked at people like he was learning something about them just by being still. And that made Grace suddenly aware of every inch of herself, how straight she was sitting, the way her fingers wrapped around the base of her wine glass, the pulse at her throat, that she hoped wasn't too obvious. Margot, still unbothered, glanced toward the women near the fireplace again, and made a soft, satisfied sound. "They're definitely talking about us," she said. "I'm sure they're texting their daughters under the table." Poor Sabrina. She never did like surprises. Grace turned slightly enough to see the two women whispering again, this time with a sharper edge in their expressions. Ronan followed her gaze. "Delia Vaughn," he muttered under his breath. "And her sister. They've been circling like hawks since I was 25. "She means well," Margot said, lips pursed. "But she's relentless. The Vaughns want a merger, not a marriage." "Sounds romantic," Grace said. That earned her a small, real smile from Ronan. He caught himself shifted in his seat, then picked up the menu. "You may as well order," he said to her, tone softening. "My mother's clearly not going to call this off." Grace nodded, scanning the options. The names of dishes blurred slightly, her heart still playing catch-up. Eventually, she settled on the same sea bass Margot had mentioned. When the waiter returned, they ordered with the rhythm of people who had done this many times before, though for Grace it all felt like walking through a dream in someone else's shoes. When they were alone again, Ronan leaned back and spoke quietly. "You don't belong to this world." The words weren't harsh. In fact, they sounded almost like a question. "I used to," Grace replied, matching his calm. "Or something adjacent to it. Non-profit boards, donor dinners, strategic partnerships with people who just wanted their names on plaques. And now I lost all that. Or gave it up depending on who you ask." Ronan nodded, a small crease forming between his brows. "So why agree to this?" Grace looked down, tracing the rim of her water glass with her finger. "Because, for once," she said slowly, "I wanted to be seen as something other than a mistake. Even if it's pretend." He was quiet. "Then, that's fair." His tone wasn't pitying. It was understanding. And that was somehow worse because it made her want to tell him more. But she didn't. Instead, Margot shifted in her seat and sighed. "Well, now that the table is beautifully set, and the sharks have lost interest, I suppose I should confess." Grace and Ronan both turned to her. This wasn't entirely about avoiding Delia, she said, eyes fixed on her water glass like it held secrets. I saw you sitting alone, Grace. And something about that struck me. I've spent a lifetime in this city watching women disappear into loneliness. I wasn't disappearing, Grace said quietly. No. But you were fading. Grace blinked, startled by the honesty. Ronan tilted his head, glancing between them. Margot looked at her son. You don't let anyone in, Ronan. You've built a fortress, a very successful, very polished, very empty one. And I thought, maybe a little lie could let in some light. Ronan leaned forward slightly. Mother, you orchestrated a fake marriage in public. And it's working, she replied, without missing a beat. Grace covered her mouth with one hand, half laughing, half stunned. You're unbelievable, Ronan muttered. Margot sipped her wine like she hadn't just turned the evening into a performance. The waiter returned with bread and another round of drinks. The table quieted. When he left, Ronan turned to Grace again. I'm sorry for being cold, he said low. I'm used to people wanting something from me. And this, he gestured between them. This felt like another setup. It still is, Grace said softly, but not accusingly. He nodded. But it doesn't feel like one now. That silence returned, heavier, this time. Not awkward, just full. Grace folded her hands on her lap. We should probably figure out what story we're telling in case someone else asks. Ronan considered. We met at a museum. Grace smiled. The photography exhibit. He nodded. You were wearing a blue scarf, and you stood in front of a photo for 20 minutes. He smiled at that, the first real one she'd seen. Sounds believable. Because it almost is, she said. They sat there, two people pretending not to fall into something neither of them had planned. And somehow it was easier than it should have been. By the time dessert came, lemon tart, Margot's insistence, the dining room had shifted again. The whispers died down. The tension at their table gave way to something warmer, familiar. As they finished, Grace glanced down at her plate and whispered, Thank you for not making this feel like a joke. Ronan shook his head. Thank you. If you enjoyed this video, comment 1, to let me know. If not, comment 2. Your thought mattered to me either way. Thank you for not making this feel like a joke. Grace didn't expect Ronan to respond right away. He seemed like the kind of man who let silence work before words. But tonight, he surprised her. I think the joke is on me, he said, leaning back slightly, fingers tracing the rim of his untouched glass. I've had more real conversation in this hour than I've had in most of this year. Grace looked up, surprised. That's hard to believe? Not if you've spent enough time around people who want your name more than your company. His voice wasn't bitter, but the weariness underneath it was undeniable. It reminded Grace of how tired she had been when everything she'd built fell apart, when the people who once championed her retreated behind polite silences. I know that feeling, she said. The moment you stop being useful, they stop seeing you. Their eyes met. Something quiet passed between them. Not intimacy, not yet. But recognition. A shared fatigue only those who'd been through quiet betrayals understood. Margot, who had been distracted by a waiter refilling her coffee, chimed back in with impeccable timing. Well, now that you two are bonded in mutual disillusionment, she said dryly, perhaps it's time I left you to it. Grace blinked. Wait, you're leaving? Margot placed her napkin neatly on the table and stood. You'll be fine. Both of you. Just keep telling the story and don't contradict each other. It's what all married couples do eventually. Before Ronan could object, Margot kissed his cheek with practiced grace, then turned to Grace. Wear something soft tomorrow. Pastels suit you. And don't forget the charity brunch at 11 Oaks. Grace opened her mouth. I never agreed. But Margot was already gliding away, a quiet storm in heels, leaving behind the scent of gardenia and command. Ronan sighed. And that's how she wins. Grace stared after her, unsure whether to laugh or panic. Did she just commit us to another lie? Technically, yes, Ronan said. But don't worry, she does it all the time. Grace rubbed her temple. You're awfully calm for someone whose mother just fake married him off to a stranger. He gave a slow smile. You're not a stranger anymore. Something about the way he said it low without irony made her stomach pull tight. She forced a small laugh to break the tension. You're very good at this. At pretending, at making it seem like this doesn't bother you. He held her gaze. That's because if I let it bother me, I'd never stop. They fell into a quieter rhythm after that. The waiter cleared the plates, offered dessert menus, then took them away again at Ronan's quick nod. Apparently, neither of them had room for more sugar. As the check arrived, discreetly taken care of by Margot before her exit, Grace stood smoothing the skirt of her dress. Ronan rose too, brushing an invisible crease from his cuff. Outside, the Charleston air was warm with a breeze off the harbor. Gas lamps flickered along the sidewalk, casting golden halos over the street. Grace turned toward the valet stand when Ronan's voice stopped her. Walk a bit. She hesitated. Just behind them, she saw Delia Vaughn exiting the restaurant. Her narrowed eyes locked on Grace with clinical curiosity already calculating. Grace turned back to Ronan. Yes. Let's walk. They moved in step down the quiet cobblestone street, lined with live oaks and storefronts closed for the night. The city had that sleepy elegance unique to southern towns after dark, like it was always keeping a secret. You know, Grace said after a while, I've seen your name in articles, investment rounds, app acquisitions, but I never expected you to be like this. Ronan glanced sideways. Like what, quiet, watchful, almost normal? That made him laugh. A real one, deep and unguarded. I'm glad I fooled you, he said. Normal is the only part I try to keep. Why? Because money makes people ridiculous. They start performing a version of themselves they think others expect. Eventually, they forget the original script. Grace nodded, hands clasped in front of her as they walked. I lost my script too, she admitted. When the board pushed me out of my nonprofit, I thought I'd bounce back. But people don't want to hire a woman whose name is linked to a scandal, even if it wasn't her fault. Ronan didn't push. Just walked beside her, letting her words settle. I used to speak at galas, she continued, quieter now. Now I ghostwrite speeches for people who never read them out loud the way they're written. He stopped walking. You're not invisible, he said. Grace looked up at him, caught off guard. You carry yourself like you're still in the room you want to be in, he added. Most people don't. The words hit her harder than they should have. She swallowed, nodding. Thank you. They turned a corner and ended up near the edge of the harbor, where the lights danced on the water like tiny promises. Grace let herself breathe in the salt air. Her heels clicked softly on the old stone path. She suddenly became very aware of the silence between them, charged now like static before a storm. She turned to face him. So what happens tomorrow? Ronan crossed his arms loosely, looking out at the water. You show up at 11 Oaks wearing something pastel and pretend to know my childhood dog's name? Grace laughed, the sound surprising both of them. And after that, he glanced at her. We figure out how deep we want this lie to go? Her smile faded just a little. What if I don't want to lie forever, then you don't? But your mother. She doesn't get to decide what happens after tomorrow, Ronan said quietly. We do. They stood there for a moment, under the golden glow of a street lamp, neither speaking. Then Ronan said, Let me call you a car. Grace shook her head. I'll walk from here. It's only a few blocks. He hesitated. Will you be all right? She looked at him. Really looked. He wasn't a man you could pin down quickly. Everything about him was deliberate. Yet in that moment, the concern in his voice wasn't performative. I'll be fine, she said. He nodded once, then reached into his pocket and handed her a card. Use this if you change your mind. Or if anything feels off. She took it. Blank except for a number embossed in silver. I'm not fragile, you know. I didn't think you were, he replied. But even strong people deserve someone to call. Grace didn't reply. She just turned, walked slowly down the lamplit path heels echoing behind her. She didn't look back. But she felt it Ronan watching her as she disappeared into the night. Grace stood at the edge of her bedroom window the next morning, watching the Charleston sun warm the quiet street below. She held a lukewarm mug of coffee untouched, while the steam faded into the air like a thought half-formed. Last night still lingered like perfume on her skin, light, disorienting, almost unreal. But the pearl bracelet on her wrist, the one she'd found tucked away in a box of her grandmother's things, reminded her that pretending had consequences. Even beautiful pretending. Her phone buzzed against the kitchen counter. Unknown number. She stared at it for a second before answering. Hello? Pastel said, Margot's voice clear and unbothered. Please don't wear anything with zippers or sharp angles. You'll be seated near the garden. Grace blinked. How did you get my number? Don't be silly. I'm Margot Ashford. Then, without missing a beat, the brunch begins at 10. 11 Oaks. Ask for Elise at the front gates, and bring your smile, it needs the practice. The line clicked. Silence. Grace lowered the phone slowly, then let out a quiet laugh into her empty kitchen. Somehow, Margot had gone from stranger to full-blown director of her social calendar in less than 24 hours. She looked down at herself, sweatpants, a faded college t-shirt, and a messy bun. Pastels, she muttered. 11 Oaks was more estate than home. The gates alone were enough to make Grace consider turning back. Wrought iron with an elaborate gold crest trimmed hedges lining the stone driveway, and trees that arched over the path like they had been taught to bow. Grace wore a pale lavender dress, fitted at the waist, soft at the shoulders. Her hair was pulled into a low chignon, and she had added pearl studs, subtle familiar. A shield, maybe. At the front, Elise greeted her with warm formality, then guided her through the garden toward the back veranda. Everything smelled of roses, fresh linen, and money. The guests were already mingling. Women in chiffon and silk held delicate champagne flutes, their laughter rising in well-timed bursts. Waiters moved like shadows, balancing trays of citrus tarts and crustless sandwiches. Grace took a slow breath. She didn't belong here. And then she saw him. Ronan stood near the edge of the stone fountain, dressed in a slate gray blazer, no tie again. His posture was relaxed but alert. He wasn't mingling. He was watching. She felt his gaze before he turned. Their eyes met. His lips tugged slightly acknowledgement without performance. She walked toward him, conscious of every step of every glance thrown her way as murmurs started. The pretend wife. The woman no one knew yesterday. Pastel suits you, Ronan said as she reached him. I'm glad, she replied softly. I was warned not to wear anything with edges. He smiled at that. Welcome to the soft world. Before she could respond, Margot appeared from the crowd like a summoned spirit. Darling, she said, brushing a kiss against Grace's cheek. You're radiant. Thank you, Grace said, more awkward than she wanted to be. Margot turned to Ronan. You've been standing alone long enough. Walk her around. Be seen. Ronan arched a brow. You're really enjoying this, aren't you? Margot sipped her drink. Immensely. But you'll thank me later. And with that, she vanished into a cluster of floral dresses and smooth conversation. Ronan looked at Grace. Shall we do a lap? She nodded, slipping her arm through his. As they walked the perimeter, Grace could feel the tension quiet but constant. Women who smiled too tightly, men who eyed her with polite confusion. And then, Delia Vaughn, standing beside her niece Sabrina. They were both picture-perfect Sabrina, in blush pink hair, in soft curls, a diamond bracelet winking in the light. Ronan Delia purred her voice, honey-laced. You've brought company. Sabrina, you remember Grace? He said casually. Grace extended her hand. It's nice to see you again. Sabrina took it, lips barely curving. Of course. You were at Palmetto House, weren't you? I was, Grace said simply. Delia's smile didn't reach her eyes. And now you're here. Isn't it funny how quickly things change? Ronan's fingers tensed slightly on Grace's arm. Grace tilted her head. Life moves fast. One moment you're alone and the next you're seated near the garden. Sabrina gave a soft laugh, more breath than sound. Well, I hope Charleston's being kind to you. Charleston is fascinating, Grace said. It hides its sharpest blades behind the prettiest flowers. Delia's smile flickered. Ronan's hand gently guided Grace forward. We'll see you around. They walked on the murmurs, returning behind them like waves hitting a dock. Grace exhaled. They don't like me. They don't know you, Ronan said. That's worse. She glanced up at him. And you? Do you know me? He looked down. Not yet. They paused near a table set with tea service. Grace picked up a tiny lemon tart, her fingers steady even as her heart thudded against her ribs. You handled that well, Ronan said. You mean I didn't break? I mean you didn't flinch? She turned to him. Did you want me to? No, he said quietly. I wanted to see if you'd let them scare you. She didn't reply. Not because she didn't have something to say, but because she felt something shifting between them. It wasn't affection, yet not romance, but it was something alive, something forming. You didn't need to walk me around, she said eventually. I can handle myself. I know, he said, but I wanted to. Grace set the tart down, untouched. Then tell me something true. Ronan's brow lifted. Now, yes, we're surrounded by fiction. Let's try truth. He nodded, thoughtful. All right, I used to be engaged. Grace blinked. She was from here, old family, smart, sweet. But she didn't love me. She loved the version of me that fit in her father's plans. I ended it the night before the invitations went out. Grace absorbed that. Do people know they pretend not to? She looked at him. Really looked. You're not what I expected, she said. He gave a small smile. Neither are you. From across the lawn, Margot raised her glass ever so slightly. Watching. Always watching. Grace turned back to Ronan. So what now? Now he said we give them something else to whisper about. And after that, Ronan didn't answer right away. Instead, he offered his arm again, and when she took it, he said quietly, Let's find out. If you enjoyed this video, comment 1, to let me know. If not, comment 2. Your thought mattered to me either way. The morning after the brunch at 11 Oaks, Grace woke to the sound of her phone vibrating against the nightstand. The sun had barely started to rise, painting the sky in soft streaks of gold and blush. For a second, she didn't move. The stillness of the room reminded her of who she used to be before pretending became necessary. She reached for the phone, squinting at the screen. Unknown number. Again. She hesitated, thumb hovering, then answered. Hello? have you checked the coastal view?" The voice was calm, familiar. "Ronan." "No," she said, sitting up. "Why, you might want to." He hung up. Grace threw on a robe, moved to the small breakfast table near the window, and opened her laptop. She typed in the name of Charleston's most read society blog, The Coastal View. The homepage loaded slowly, but the headline was already screaming. Ashford heir's secret wife. New beauty appears on Ronan Ashford's arm. Sources say marriage was quietly confirmed. Grace stared at the screen. A photograph, grainy but clear enough, filled the top of the page. She recognized the moment instantly. It was at Palmetto House. She and Ronan clinking glasses. Her laughing. Him watching her with something that looked a little too real. The caption read, "Is this love or legacy? Charleston's most eligible bachelor may already be off the market." Grace's stomach dropped. She clicked the article. It was worse than she thought. Every detail was spun into narrative. Margot's appearance, their sudden public outing at 11 Oaks, her hand on Ronan's arm. Quotes from unnamed guests claimed to have seen them holding hands, sharing intimate glances. And of course, Delia Vaughn was quoted indirectly saying only, "Some women arrive quickly and hope people won't ask why." Grace leaned back in her chair, the air tightening around her. She was just starting to breathe normally again. Just starting to find her rhythm after everything that had gone wrong in her life. Now this. A marriage she hadn't agreed to outside of a social charade was suddenly being paraded as real. Permanent. Her phone buzzed again, texts now. "Gwen, I assume you've seen it. Call me when you're ready." Unknown. "You're playing a dangerous game, sweetheart." She froze at that one. No name, just the message. She stared at it, reread it, then quietly turned the phone face down. By the time she arrived at the Ashford estate that afternoon, she'd rehearsed what she needed to say, how this had gone too far, how it was supposed to be one dinner, one brunch, one brief favor for a woman who didn't take no for an answer. Margot was already waiting in the rose room, seated in a high-backed chair, sipping from a porcelain cup that probably cost more than Grace's rent. "You've seen it," Margot said, not even pretending it was a question. Grace walked in, her voice low but steady. "You told me it would be quiet, that it was just to get through a dinner." Margot didn't flinch. "It was. The article wasn't me, but you didn't stop it." Margot sighed, placing her cup down carefully on its saucer. "This city spins its own stories, Grace. You've lived here long enough to know that. I also know you don't let things happen unless you want them to." That got a reaction, a pause. Slight, but enough. "You're right," Margot said. "I don't." Grace folded her arms. Why, Margot rose from her seat, walked toward the window, and looked out across the manicured lawn. "Because Ronan stopped believing in connection a long time ago," she said. "He trusts numbers, strategy, risk calculations, not people, especially not people who claim to care." Grace's voice softened. "And you think a public rumor will fix that? I think it's harder to push someone away when everyone believes you're already theirs." Grace shook her head, jaw tight. "That's not love. That's manipulation." Margot turned, then her gaze sharper. "Don't act like you haven't benefited from this, too. You've been seen again, spoken about, considered." Grace's throat tightened. "I never asked for that." "No," Margot said, calmer now. "But you didn't walk away either." There was a silence, deep and awkward. Then a voice broke it from the doorway. "She didn't walk away because you turned it into something she couldn't leave without damage." Ronan. He stepped into the room, eyes steady, posture composed but unreadable. Grace's heart jumped, but she didn't let it show. Margot looked at her son. "You're early. You leaked the story." "I didn't," she said, "but I didn't stop it either." Grace stepped back, slightly looking at him. "Ronan, this is out of control." "I know." "Then fix it." "I'm trying." His voice was low, strained. For the first time, it didn't sound like Ronan the billionaire, Ronan the strategist. Just Ronan the man caught in something he hadn't built, but hadn't stopped either. "I'll talk to the editor," he said. "Get a correction. A soft retraction. We'll say it was a misinterpretation." "And what happens when people don't believe that they never do?" Margot said behind him. "But they'll forget eventually. Someone always gives them a new distraction." Grace looked between them. "I won't be used for someone else's distraction." Ronan stepped closer. "Then let me make this right. Let me fix it for you." She paused. Her eyes searched his face. His sincerity was there, unmistakable. But so was the part of him that had let it go this far. Her voice was barely above a whisper. "I don't want to fix. I want the truth." He didn't reply right away. And when he finally did, it wasn't what she expected. "I don't know how to give that anymore." Something in her chest cracked, quiet but deep. She nodded once, then stepped back. "Then maybe we stop pretending for a while." She turned to leave. As she reached the door, Margot spoke again, her voice softer than before. "Be careful, Grace. This city loves a new face. But it turns cold fast if you stop smiling." Grace didn't look back. She just walked out. Alone. Again. Grace didn't go home right away. She walked. Long enough that the sun slipped lower in the sky, softening the sharp edges of Charleston's homes into warm, honey-colored silhouettes. Her heels eventually came off, tucked into one hand, her bare feet brushing against brick sidewalks, still holding on to the day's heat. She needed the air, the space, the silence to settle what had unraveled inside her. Because it wasn't just the article or the whispers or the lie that had slipped too far out of her hands. It was the look in Ronan's eyes, real, unguarded, for once not calculated. And yet, it wasn't enough. He didn't know how to give the truth anymore, and she'd spent too long with people who didn't know how to stay honest. By the time she arrived at Gwen Rivera's townhouse, the porch light was on, casting a gentle glow over the climbing jasmine. Grace knocked once, then again, before Gwen pulled the door open. "Come in." Gwen said no questions, no performance. Just space. Grace stepped inside and sank onto the old leather couch that had probably held 100 untold stories before hers. Gwen handed her a mug of something warm, probably herbal, maybe honeyed, and sat across from her waiting. "I messed up," Grace said, eyes low. "No," Gwen replied. "You got pulled in. I stayed. You were human." Grace gripped the mug tighter. It was supposed to be pretend. One dinner, one brunch. Now people think I'm... She shook her head. "Married to a man who can't even tell me what's real." Gwen leaned forward. "What do you want, Grace?" Grace blinked. "What? Forget what's expected. Forget Margot. Forget Charleston gossip." "What do you want?" Grace's voice was barely audible. "I wanted a clean start." And instead, Grace looked up. "I'm headline fodder in someone else's social war." Gwen was quiet for a moment, then stood and walked to a cabinet. She pulled out a slim folder and handed it over. "I was saving this. But maybe now's the time." Grace opened it slowly. A grant proposal. An anonymous donor was funding a new community mentorship program, something that needed leadership experience and a clean vision, the kind of work Grace had done before the scandal. Her breath caught. "You recommended me. I said they'd be lucky to have you." Grace looked up. Even now, with the press, the rumors, they want someone who knows how to survive public pressure and still show up. You've already passed the test. For the first time all day, Grace felt something ease in her chest. Gwen's eyes softened. You can still write your own name, Grace, no matter how many people try to write it for you. She nodded slowly, letting the weight of it settle. Later that night, back in her apartment, Grace stood barefoot in the kitchen, the light's low music playing softly from the record player in the corner. She was washing a wine glass when her phone buzzed. This time she didn't hesitate. "Ronan, I know you meant it when you walked away. I deserved it." She stared at the screen. Then it buzzed again. "But I meant it too when I said I wanted to fix it. I didn't just mean the article. And again, I meant us, whatever we've started. I want to understand how to be real. With you." Grace let the message sit. She didn't respond. She wasn't ready to hand over forgiveness like it was a clean slate. Not when her own life was still rebuilding. But the message stayed open on her screen. The next morning, the gossip mill was already churning louder. Another article. This time from the Southern Ledger, a more reputable outlet. The headline was sharp: Ashford's mystery woman speaks at youth center. Former nonprofit leader Grace Harper resurfaces in new role shifts attention from social scene to service. Grace stared at the photo accompanying the piece taken the evening before. Gwen had sent it in without telling her. In it, Grace was talking with a group of teens, smiling hands animated mid-sentence. The light in her face looked different, present. She barely noticed the quote beneath it. "I don't need to be known for who I stand beside. I'd rather be remembered for what I build." It wasn't just a press move. It was a boundary. And someone had heard it. Because that afternoon, a package arrived at her door. A pale blue box neatly wrapped. Inside a book, not new, worn, annotated. A first-edition collection of essays by a female journalist Grace had once quoted in a long-forgotten speech. Tucked inside was a note in sharp handwriting. "You said once that stories matter most when they're honest. I'm trying to start there." She ran her fingers over the edge of the note heart, tightening. He remembered her words. Not just what she said in public, but what she once whispered during a quiet moment on the walk back from 11 Oaks. He'd been listening. Still, the conflict stayed curled tight in her. Because even though something inside her wanted to lean toward him again, to say yes, to reach back, she wasn't sure if the story they were writing was one she trusted yet. But she wasn't closing the book either. Not yet. Instead, she placed it gently on her shelf between the titles that had shaped her. A space now marked by a question she wasn't ready to answer. But maybe, just maybe, she wanted to. The sun filtered through the windows of the youth center, warming the rows of mismatched chairs and chipped tables. Grace stood near the whiteboard, a marker still uncapped in her hand, but her mind was far from the lesson plan she'd just finished reviewing. She glanced again at the book on the corner of the table, the first edition Ronan had sent. It hadn't moved from where she placed it yesterday, but its presence felt louder than anything else in the room. Outside the door, she could hear the muffled sound of teenagers arriving half-laughs, dragging sneakers, the slouch of backpacks, hitting walls. It brought a flicker of calm, the kind that only came when you were in the right place, doing the right thing. And yet, she tucked the marker into its slot and walked out to greet them. "All right," she called, raising her voice just enough. "Phones down, mine's on. We've got stories to write today, and you don't get to blame autocorrect for your grammar." That earned a few groans and smirks. One of the older girls, Ayana, tossed her phone into her bag and sat cross-legged on the floor. "Can we write about real stuff?" she asked. "Only if you promise not to hold back," Grace said, already knowing the answer. As the students settled in, Grace moved among them like someone returning to familiar waters. She asked questions, challenged quiet thinkers, pushed for more honesty in their drafts. And all the while, she felt herself slipping back into something she hadn't realized she'd missed: being useful, being trusted. Still, in the quieter moments between questions and reading aloud, her thoughts circled. Ronan hadn't reached out again. No calls, no texts. Just the note, the book, and the space he'd left between them. She appreciated that even if it unsettled her. Ms. Harper Ayana's voice pulled her back. "You okay, Grace?" Blinked. "Yeah, just thinking." Ayana tilted her head. About the guy, Grace smiled caught. That obvious, "You smiled weird when you looked at the book. That's a someone sent me this smile." Grace didn't deny it. Ayana leaned in a little. "Is it good weird or bad weird?" Grace looked at her for a long moment before replying. "I haven't decided yet." After the workshop, Grace stayed late to clean up. She moved slowly, letting the silence stretch around her like a familiar coat. She had just turned off the last of the lights when the front door creaked open. She turned, startled. Ronan stood in the entryway, casual in jeans and a navy jacket, holding a paper bag in one hand. "I brought dinner," he said, lifting the bag slightly. "Figured you'd still be here." She didn't answer at first, just took him in unexpected, out of place, and yet he looked like he belonged in this version of her world. "You didn't text. I didn't want to assume." "You didn't ask either. I didn't want to make it harder." Her hand rested on the back of a chair. "And yet here you are." Ronan took a cautious step forward. "You said you wanted truth. So here it is. I've spent every day since that brunch trying to figure out where I stopped being a person and started being an asset. I don't like who I am in that world anymore." She crossed her arms, guarded. "So you show up here, why, to prove you're different?" "No," he said, "to ask if there's still space for me to try." Grace didn't move. The tension between them pressed in like humidity. He set the bag on the table carefully. "Ty, I remembered you said you like it when it's raining." She glanced towards the window. It had started to drizzle, soft and rhythmic. Her voice came softer. "You remembered that I remember more than I probably should." They stood in silence again, the air between them heavy with all the things they hadn't said. Finally, Grace stepped forward and opened the bag. The smell of ginger and lemongrass filled the space. She pulled out 2 containers and placed them on the table without speaking. Ronan pulled out a chair. She didn't stop him. They ate in near silence, broken only by the clink of chopsticks and the quiet patter of rain against the windows. It should have felt awkward, but it didn't. It felt like something rebuilding itself, one small, careful piece at a time. Halfway through, Grace looked up. "Why did you really send that book?" Ronan didn't look away. "Because it was the first time I heard you speak with certainty. You quoted her like you knew her, and I wanted to give something back that meant as much." She studied him. "That woman Marlena Hyde, she lost everything when she refused to stay quiet." "I know." Grace set her chopsticks down. "And you think I'm like her? I think you're someone who doesn't quit, even when the room tells you to sit down." She wasn't ready to tell him what that meant to her. Not yet. But she didn't look away either. He reached into his pocket, pulled out another small envelope and slid it across the table. She hesitated. Then opened it. Inside was a simple typed note. The Coastal View published a retraction. Quiet page 6, but it's there. I told them the truth. Grace looked up sharply. "You did," I said. "The rumors were false. That we're not married, that we're not engaged, that we're not anything other than 2 people trying to figure out what we are. And they believed that they printed it. That's enough." Grace leaned back, the words hitting places she hadn't let herself touch. Ronan watched her carefully. "I didn't come tonight to fix what happened. I came to say I'm done pretending. I don't want to play a role anymore, not with you, not with anyone." Her voice dropped to almost a whisper. "And if I don't know what I want yet," he smiled gently, Then I'll wait, or walk away. Whatever you need. She looked at him for a long moment, then finally she said, You can stay, for now. He didn't push for more, and that more than anything made her believe he meant it. The following morning, Charleston woke under a silver sky. Not quite raining, not quite clear, just that in-between stillness that made the world feel paused. Grace sat at the small cafe table outside her favorite corner shop, a warm cup of black tea cupped between her hands. She'd come here for years. It was one of the few places in town that still felt untouched by whispers, articles, or legacy. A place where people said good morning because they meant it, not because they were calculating who else was listening. She hadn't expected to see Ronan again so soon. But as she looked up from her mug, there he was crossing the street, coat slightly damp hair, a little tousled from the wind. He wasn't smiling, and that was what made her sit up straighter. Morning, he said, sliding into the seat across from her, like he'd done it 100 times before. What's wrong? He didn't answer right away, just ran a hand over the back of his neck like he was debating how much to say. There's a fundraiser tonight, he finally said. My mother's hosting, large crowd, investors, board members, the works. Grace tilted her head, and Delia Vaughn has been invited, along with Sabrina. Grace's stomach tightened slightly, though she didn't let it show. Still chasing a last name, Ronan gave a dry smile. Always, but this time, it's different. She waited. He leaned in, voice lower. Someone leaked internal notes from a board meeting. The narrative is starting to turn, that I'm distracted, that I've prioritized personal entanglements over professional obligations. Grace blinked. Because of me, because they need a reason. And I'm giving them one. She sat back, processing. So this fundraiser, you need to clean up the image. He didn't reply. Do you want me there? She asked quietly. Yes, he said. But not as a cover. I don't want to walk into that room alone. She studied him. The tiredness in his eyes, the weight he was holding under that composed tone. I'll come, she said. But I'm not going to be a shield. If someone tries to twist this again, they won't, he said firmly. Not if I handle it right. She nodded slowly. Then you better start practicing honesty before the hors d'oeuvres. That night, the Ashford estate looked even grander than it had at brunch. Soft lights were strung through the garden, the fountain lit from below, casting dancing shadows on the marble walkways. Grace stepped out of the car in a navy gown, elegant but simple. No sparkle, no pretense. Ronan was waiting at the front steps. He froze when he saw her. You look, she raised an eyebrow. Grounding, he finished. In a good way. She smiled. You look like you've already had 2 brandy sips and a warning from Margot. He chuckled. Close. He offered his arm. This time she took it without hesitation. Inside the room was a sea of quiet judgment. Polished conversations. Men in tailored suits. Women with soft, expensive smiles. They'd barely crossed the threshold when Delia appeared, her champagne glass already half empty. Her dress an icy shade of mint that matched her demeanor. Ronan, she said, voice silk over stone. How lovely to see you. And you, Delia, he said with measured politeness. Her eyes slid to Grace. Still playing house, I see. Grace smiled lightly. Some of us don't have to pretend. Delia's mouth twitched. Of course, I suppose every empire starts with a bold claim, Ronan cut in, voice cool, and yours was built on marrying into better ones. Delia's smile faded just enough. Ronan nodded. Excuse us. He led Grace away, his hand resting briefly at her back. You didn't have to say that, she murmured. She had it coming. That doesn't mean she'll forget it. She never forgets anything. That's her problem. They reached the edge of the ballroom, where a jazz trio played softly, and waiters floated with trays of scallops and champagne. Margot appeared as if summoned. "You're late," she said. "And you've stirred the pot too early." Ronan sighed. "You're welcome." She turned to Grace, eyes sharp, but not unkind. "Try not to vanish tonight. People will want to ask questions. I'm not answering any," Grace replied. Margot gave a faint smile. "Good girl." With that, she disappeared into the crowd. Grace and Ronan lingered near the gallery entrance where the noise dipped slightly. He took a glass of water from a passing tray, handed it to her without speaking. She accepted it. "Are you all right?" "No," he said. "But I'm trying to be." She looked at him. Really looked. "You don't have to prove anything to these people, I know," he said, "but part of me still wants to." They stood in silence for a beat. Then Mr. Ashford came a voice behind them. They turned. An older man in a dark suit with a presence that spoke of influence more than charm. "James Merritt Ronan," said, shaking his hand. "Good to see you." "And you?" The man's eyes flicked to Grace. "I don't believe we've met." "Grace Harper," she said calmly. "I work with the Downtown Youth Mentorship Program." "Ah," he nodded. "Very civic-minded. It wasn't a compliment. It wasn't quite an insult either." Grace smiled. "I find it's harder to manipulate teenagers than shareholders." Merritt raised a brow. "Sharp?" Ronan spoke before it could turn. "She's also the reason we secured last quarter's downtown portfolio. Her insight flagged zoning risks early." Grace blinked, surprised. Merritt paused. "Well, perhaps there's more value here than I assumed." He moved off without another word. Grace turned. "That wasn't true," it was Ronan said. "You told me about that loophole at lunch. I passed it along. It saved us 3 weeks of review." She didn't know what to say to that. "Grace," he said, quieter now, "I'm not just proud to stand next to you because of how you look tonight. I'm proud because you make everything around you sharper, more real." Emotion surged unexpectedly. She wasn't ready for it, not here in this room of curated masks. She looked up at him, voice softer than she meant it to be. "This doesn't feel like pretending anymore." He held her gaze. "It never was. Not for me." And in that moment, the noise of the room faded just enough to let the truth land between them, quiet and sure. Not everything was fixed, but something had shifted. And this time it felt like a beginning. The ballroom had emptied slowly after Ronan's quiet confession. A beginning, he'd said, and Grace believed him, or at least she wanted to. But belief had weight, and her past had taught her that weight could crack even the most elegant glass. Now, hours later, the house had gone still. Only the soft ticking of the grandfather clock in the front hallway kept time. Grace stood barefoot in one of the sitting rooms, holding a small photo frame she'd noticed on a side table. It was Ronan Young, maybe 10, smiling awkwardly beside a woman who wasn't Margot. Softer eyes, warmer posture. A mother. She was startled when Ronan appeared in the doorway, no jacket sleeves rolled, holding 2 glasses of water. He noticed the photo in her hands. "My aunt," he said, setting the glasses down, "took care of me for a while when things weren't smooth." Grace looked at him, letting the silence between them breathe. "She looks kind." She was. Still is. Lives in Savannah now. Grace returned the photo gently to its place. "You never talk about your family. Neither do you." She tilted her head. "That's fair." Ronan sat on the edge of the low couch, hands clasped loosely between his knees. "I spent a lot of time trying to be the kind of person this family could hold on to," he said quietly. "But every time I got closer, it felt like they wanted less of me, and more of the version they'd curated." "You mean the future CEO version?" The safe bet. The dependable heir. The one who didn't ask why certain contracts looked strange, or why some nonprofits never saw the money we pledged to them. Grace narrowed her eyes. "Wait. What do you mean by that? Ronan looked up, hesitating. There's a development project. Waterfront. High profile. We pledged a percentage to local community reinvestment support for housing education grants, youth initiatives. The usual promises. But last week I went over the disbursement schedules and nothing's been sent. Grace stood up straighter. Not even the initial percentage. He shook his head. It's sitting in a holding account reclassified as consultation fees. Her voice turned cold. Who signed off on that? Ronan didn't answer. She stepped closer. Ronan. My mother, he said finally. The words hung heavy between them. Grace's heart pounded, not in fear, but in fury. Quiet, sharpened fury. This was your family's signature project, the one that was supposed to rebuild trust with the community, right? He nodded, jaw tight. And now it's just another broken promise I didn't know, he said. Not until last week. And now you do. He looked up at her steady. Which is why I'm telling you. Because I'm going to fix it. Grace crossed her arms. Gaze locked. Not with another quiet check or polished press release. If you're serious, really serious, you have to confront it head on. I know. Her tone softened, but only slightly. This is more than business, Ronan. This is people's lives. If you cover this up, if you smooth it out just to protect your family's name, you're part of the same lie. He nodded once. I'm not asking you to excuse it. I'm asking you to help me hold it accountable. She blinked. That was the last thing she expected to hear. You want me involved? I need someone who doesn't flinch. Who knows how to speak truth in a room full of spin? She exhaled slowly. That won't go over well with Margot. It's not about her anymore. That sentence short but seismic. Grace studied him. There was something different in his eyes tonight. Not just regret. Not just charm. But clarity. What do you want me to do? She asked. I want you to come to the next board review. See the files. Ask the questions I can't. Tell me where the gaps are. You know this puts me in the line of fire, right? I know it puts us both there. She looked away for a moment, jaw clenched. Her whole life she'd fought for a seat at the table. But this wasn't just a seat. It was a spotlight. Okay, she said. But on one condition. Ronan tilted his head. No more secrets, she said. From now on, I hear the bad news when you do. No filters, no delay. His answer came without pause. Deal. Grace walked toward the glass of water he'd poured earlier, took a sip, then set it down carefully. I should go, she said, voice quieter now. You don't have to. She looked at him. I do. Not out of anger, not even hesitation, but because she needed space to think, to weigh what she was walking into not just with the Ashfords but with Ronan himself. He didn't argue. Instead, he stood, walked her to the door, and opened it for her. The night air was cool, almost tender. As she stepped outside, she paused on the stone steps, then turned. You're not who I thought you were, she said softly. He met her eyes. Is that good or bad? I don't know yet. Then she walked into the night, each step echoing with something unfinished, but finally real. The boardroom at Ashford Capital was nothing like the spaces Grace was used to. The windows spanned from floor to ceiling, showcasing the Charleston skyline in a carefully curated view. The walls were cold, rich mahogany panels, expensive art that meant nothing, and silence that seemed designed to intimidate. Grace sat at the far end of the table across from Ronan, who looked like he belonged there. He always did. But today there was a crack in his calm, a subtle tension in his jaw, a quiet flicker behind his eyes. The board members filtered in slowly. Most offered only brief nods toward Grace, a few curious glances, and one or two raised eyebrows that didn't even try to hide their surprise. She ignored them all. This wasn't about winning their approval. It was about truth. When Margot entered, everything changed. She swept into the room like a shift in pressure, elegant, commanding, as if the building itself leaned forward to hear her speak. Her eyes landed on Grace, and for a second they simply studied her. Not in anger, not in fear, just calculation. "Ms. Harper," she said smoothly, taking a seat. "I wasn't informed you'd be joining us." Grace met her gaze without flinching. "Ronan invited me. I'm here as an advisor." Margot's smile didn't reach her eyes. "How unconventional." Ronan cleared his throat, cutting in. "We're reviewing community disbursements for the Waterfront District project. Grace has experience with local non-profit compliance. Her insight is relevant." Someone down the table shifted in their seat. An older man, Mr. Chandler, if Grace remembered right, spoke first. "With all due respect, Ronan, this isn't a policy workshop. It's a quarterly financial review." "Which is why it matters where the numbers go," Grace said, voice steady. "Especially when they're not going where they're supposed to." Another board member glanced her way. "Excuse me." Grace slid a copy of the disbursement report across the table. "The Waterfront Initiative promised $4.2 million toward community grants, education, housing, job training. None of that has been transferred." Chandler frowned. "Those are pending." "They're delayed," Grace said, "and reclassified as consultation costs." Margot lifted her chin. "We're streamlining. That funding will be managed internally until the community partners prove operational readiness." Grace's voice was quiet but clear. "So the money's still sitting in your account, with no timeline, no transparency, and no oversight." Silence. Then Ronan spoke. "She's right. All heads turned toward him. I've reviewed the schedules," he continued. "The funding isn't moving, and it won't unless we push it. We made promises, public ones. If we don't deliver, we risk more than bad press. We erode trust we barely have." Margot's voice was soft, dangerous. "This is not the place to second-guess the board." "I'm not second-guessing," he said. "I'm holding us accountable." She stared at him, still composed, but her eyes betrayed the shift. "You're making this personal." "No," Ronan said. "I'm making it honest." Chandler shifted again. "If this becomes public, it won't," Grace interrupted. "Unless it has to." Margot turned to her tone, clipped. "That sounds like a threat." "It's a choice," Grace said. "Either we redirect the funds as promised starting this quarter, or I speak to the Coastal Housing Coalition myself." A beat of silence. Then Margot leaned back, smoothing the silk of her jacket sleeve. "You've become quite bold, Ms. Harper." "No," Grace said. "I've just stopped apologizing for asking the right questions." A ripple of tension moved through the room. No one spoke. Then Ronan pushed a new set of documents toward the center. "I've already drafted a revision. The full disbursement schedule including third-party oversight and reporting structures. I move we approve it now." Chandler hesitated. "That's unusual." "But not illegal," Ronan replied. "Unless someone here would like to explain why it shouldn't be approved." More silence. Margot said nothing. After a moment, Chandler cleared his throat. "Let's vote." It passed. 7-2. Grace didn't need to guess who the two were. The meeting ended with tight handshakes and half-hearted compliments. People filed out with forced smiles and quiet tension, the way they always did when power had shifted slightly, and no one knew where the fault lines now lay. Grace stayed behind, gathering her notes. Her fingers trembled just slightly as the adrenaline faded. Ronan walked over. "You were incredible." She exhaled. "I wasn't sure I could do that." You didn't just do it, he said. You changed the room. She looked up at him, unsure whether to feel proud or afraid. Margot remained seated across the table, watching. When Ronan stepped away to answer a call, she stood and approached Grace. You played your hand well, Margot said. It wasn't a game. It always is, Margot replied. You just happened to be holding the truth. This time. Grace didn't respond. Margot continued. You've made yourself useful. That's not a compliment. It's a warning. Grace's throat tightened, but she didn't look away. I'm not here to replace you, she said. Margot tilted her head slightly. Oh, Grace. You couldn't. That's not your role. Then what is my role? Margot stepped closer. That's what I'm waiting to find out. She walked out without another word. Grace stood still, heart thudding. Moments later, Ronan returned, slipping his phone into his pocket. Everything all right? Grace forced a small smile. Not sure yet. He studied her. Want to go somewhere quiet? She nodded. They left together. But neither of them noticed the woman across the lobby just outside the glass doors, watching from a bench with her coat pulled tight. Sabrina Vaughn. Phone in hand. Face unreadable. And for the first time in weeks, Grace felt the shift. Like someone else had just been dealt the next card. The restaurant was quiet. Tucked away just off the Battery, it was the kind of place that didn't need a sign. The kind where regulars came to disappear for an hour not to be seen. Dim lighting, real candles, and windows that framed the harbor like a painting. Grace sat across from Ronan in a corner booth, her jacket draped over the seat beside her. She stirred the lemon into her tea, slowly, barely looking at the menu. Neither of them had said much since they left Ashford Capital. The silence wasn't uncomfortable. It was full. Waited. Waiting. Ronan broke it first. Thank you. She didn't look up. For what? For saying what I couldn't. For backing me when it mattered. I didn't do it for you. I know. He reached for his water, paused, then set it back down, untouched. I should have stopped it sooner, he said. The disbursement issue. The whole illusion. I let it fester because I didn't want to unravel what little trust my mother had in me. Grace finally looked at him. You still care what she thinks? Ronan didn't deny it. She raised me. Built this company from nothing. Her approval was currency. It always has been. She nodded slowly. That's a hard thing to unlearn. He leaned back in the booth. What about you? Why risk it all again? After everything Charleston already dragged you through, her jaw tightened. She hadn't expected him to ask it so directly. I couldn't stand by and watch it happen again. The lies, the shifting of blame. I've been on the other side of that machine. Remember, people like Margot don't have to clean up the mess when it all falls apart. But the kids who never got those grants, the teachers who needed that funding, they do. He watched her eyes steady. You care more than anyone I've ever met. I care because no one did when I needed them to. There was a beat of silence between them. She hadn't meant to say it like that. Not so bare. But Ronan didn't flinch. He just nodded like he understood something he hadn't before. The waiter came and went, orders placed with minimal fuss. Grace barely touched her food when it arrived. Her appetite was buried under too much adrenaline. Ronan sat forward, resting his elbows on the table. There's something else you should know. Grace met his eyes warily. What now? Sabrina's in town. Grace's stomach flipped. She's back. I saw her earlier, outside the building. Grace frowned. Why didn't you say something sooner? Because I wasn't sure what it meant. I still don't. She let that sink in. Sabrina Vaughn, the one-time socialite, former almost fiancé, and the person Margot Ashford once openly preferred for her son. She was smart calculating, and when she wanted something, she got it. Do you think she's here for the company? Grace asked. I don't know, Ronan said. She didn't come inside, just sat there, watching. Grace exhaled slowly. That's not nothing. No, he agreed. It's never nothing with her. The tension returned, thick and unspoken. Grace reached for her tea again, her fingers brushing the rim, grounding herself. If she's back, it's not just to say hello. No, Ronan said. And if she walks into the boardroom again, it's because someone wants her there. Margot. Neither of them said it, but they both knew. Grace's phone buzzed against the table. She glanced down. A message from Gwen. You might want to see this. Check the Southern Ledger. She opened the article link and felt her chest tighten. The headline was subtle, carefully worded, but sharp. Sabrina Vaughn returns to Charleston. Sources suggest potential Ashford reconciliation. Grace blinked. What is it? Ronan asked, watching her expression change. She turned the phone around and slid it across the table. He read it. His jaw tightened. This wasn't an accident, Grace said. She's making a move. And someone gave her a microphone. Ronan stared at the article, then looked up slowly. It's a distraction. From what? From us. Grace swallowed hard. You mean the board's starting to notice? No, he said. I mean someone's making sure they do. And they want her back in the picture because she knows how to play by their rules. She leaned back in the booth, heart racing now. So, what happens if she gets inside again? He didn't answer at first. Then she'll undo everything we just did. The clarity of it shook Grace. For a moment she looked at Ronan, at the man across from her, the one who had once seemed so far from her world. Now they were tangled together in something neither of them had planned for. And yet here they were, together, until they weren't. Do you still care about her? Grace asked quietly. His eyes snapped to hers. No, he said. Not like that. But you once did. I once thought I had to. That stopped her, because she understood it more than she wanted to admit. You don't have to choose me, Grace said, her voice lower now. I don't want to be another performance. Another answer to someone else's expectations. You're not, he said. You're the first thing I've done that wasn't about them. She wanted to believe him. Part of her already did. But another part, quieter, older, still remembered what it felt like to be used. To be trusted, then abandoned. You need to talk to your mother, she said. Before this becomes something you can't come back from. I will. Tonight. Ronan held her gaze. Okay. She stood slowly, sliding her jacket over her shoulders. Her tea was cold, now untouched. I'm going to walk home, she said. I'll go with you. No, she said gently. You have your own walk to make. He didn't fight it. Grace stepped outside, the air sharp with salt from the harbor. The city lights blurred slightly in the mist rolling in. As she started down the street alone, she could feel it again, that same shift in the air from the boardroom. The same sense that something was coming. Only this time it had a name. And it wasn't finished yet. Ronan stood at the threshold of his mother's study, the door half open, the air inside thick with silence and sandalwood. Margot Ashford sat behind her desk, reading glasses low on her nose, a fountain pen paused above a thick packet of papers. She didn't look up. I was wondering when you'd come, she said, calm as ever. He stepped in, closing the door softly behind him. We need to talk. Her pen scratched across the page, deliberate, unhurried. If this is about the article, I suggest you let the PR team handle it. Sabrina's return has more to do with nostalgia than narrative. Ronan walked to the center of the room, ignoring the chair in front of her desk. He stayed standing. Don't lie to me. Margot finally looked up, her expression unreadable. I don't lie. I manage perception. It's not the same. Sabrina didn't leak that article on her own. No, Margot said. She didn't. Ronan's breath caught. So you did. She's familiar to them, Margot said, as if that explained everything. When the board feels uncertain, they lean on the familiar. I gave them a reminder. He stared at her. You undermined me. After everything I've done, after everything Grace and I risked, you threw it away for optics. I preserved the company's balance, she replied. You may not like my methods, but I built this legacy. I know how fragile it is. Ronan shook his head, pain rising beneath the calm. No, you protected a myth. You don't want this company to evolve. You want it to repeat itself, safely, predictably, with someone like Sabrina beside me so you can pretend it's all still under control. Margot rose from her chair slowly, her voice quiet but pointed. You think this is about control? He met her eyes. Isn't it, I watched your father charm the press and gut every partner behind closed doors. I watched our name rise while we lost every thread of integrity. So yes, when it was finally mine to lead, I controlled it. Because control was the only way we survived. She stepped closer, her voice softening but not wavering. And then you bring in a woman who questions everything, who threatens to pull back the curtain and show people what we've hidden to stay afloat. Grace is admirable, but she is dangerous. She's honest, Ronan said. And I'd rather burn this company down than run it on the same secrets. Margot's jaw twitched. She's not going away, he added. Not because of some headline, not because you planted her competition on a silver tray. She'll leave, Margot said quietly. They always do. Ronan looked at his mother, something inside him fracturing. Is that what you're counting on? Margot didn't answer. He backed away from the desk, breath tight in his chest. I'm done playing this game, he said. I'm calling the board tomorrow. We're opening an external audit on the waterfront project and any initiative tied to reclassified funds. Her eyes flashed. That's suicide. No, Ronan said. It's leadership. He left her there standing in the center of everything she'd built, unwilling to see what it had cost. Outside, the air felt colder than he remembered. Grace paced the floor of her apartment, phone in hand. Gwen's voice crackled through the speaker. I've already heard from 2 local reporters. Both want a comment from you. Grace ran a hand through her hair. About what exactly? That you're interfering with company finances, that you're playing girlfriend for influence. Grace closed her eyes. It's starting. They're painting you like a liability. And the kicker, Sabrina's having lunch with 2 board members next week, publicly. Grace's stomach dropped. On purpose. Oh, it's a strategy. And it's working. Grace sat on the edge of her couch, the silence loud in her ears. She had fought too hard for this, for truth, for change, to let it fall apart now. I need to be ready, she said finally. If they're going public, then so am I. Gwen hesitated. You're sure? Grace nodded. Let's call a press meeting. Small, intimate. I'll tell my side on my terms. She hung up and stared out the window. A storm was coming, but this time she wasn't backing down. She'd been a placeholder in other people's stories before. This one she would write herself. The soft hum of the hotel ballroom buzzed behind the heavy velvet curtain. Grace stood just off stage, her hands wrapped tightly around a warm mug of tea she hadn't touched. Beyond the curtain, a curated crowd of local press, non-profit leaders, and community advocates gathered. Gwen had kept the invitation list small, intentional. Controlled. This wasn't about spectacle. It was about truth. Grace inhaled slowly, willing her heartbeat to settle. Her palms were still damp, but her voice, she trusted it. It had carried her through worse. Gwen stepped up beside her tablet, in hand eyes steady. They're ready. Grace nodded, barely audible. How bad is the noise online? Loud Gwen said. But scattered. Rumors, headlines. Sabrina's people are trying to shape you as the disruptor, the outsider. Grace gave a dry smile. They're not wrong. They're not right, either, Gwen said. The difference is, you're about to tell your story before they can rewrite it. The MC's voice called her name. Grace stepped forward. The lights hit her first warm, sharp. She blinked against them as she walked to the podium, the room folding into silence. There were no teleprompters, no notes, just her, and the moment. She took a breath. Good afternoon, I'm Grace Harper. A pause. Not nervous, intentional. Letting the name land. I'm not here today as a spokesperson, or a partner, or a headline. I'm here as someone who's lived on both sides of the promise. A ripple of attention moved through the room. People leaned in. When I came to Charleston, I wasn't invited in. I wasn't given a seat at any table. I had to build one and drag it into the room myself. I've seen what happens when systems protect themselves instead of people. I've seen what gets buried in polite meetings and legal footnotes. And I've seen what it costs. She scanned the room. Faces watching. Waiting. Over the last month, I've worked with Ashford Capital to review a series of philanthropic disbursements tied to the Waterfront District project. What we found was a pattern of delay deflection and reclassification. Money meant for schools, shelters, youth programs held back. Hidden behind layers of internal policy. Someone shifted in their seat. A pen tapped. A phone screen lit up recording. This isn't about blame, Grace said. It's about responsibility. Real accountability doesn't begin when a scandal breaks. It begins when someone dares to ask the question, why hasn't this reached the people we promised to serve? She softened just enough. I asked that question, and I won't apologize for it. A pause. I know I've been called a lot of things in the last few weeks. Unqualified, manipulative, even opportunistic. Her voice didn't shake. But let me be clear, I'm not here to tear anything down. I'm here to build something better. And if that makes me inconvenient, so be it. Silence. And then the faintest sound, hands clapping. Just a few at first. Then more. Gwen stood at the back of the room, her jaw tight with emotion. Grace gave a small nod of thanks, then stepped away from the podium. As she exited, her phone buzzed again. One message. From Ronan. I saw the stream. I've never been prouder. Ronan stood by the large window in his office, phone in hand, watching the city stretch beneath the falling light. The press conference was already making waves. Articles were shifting. Comments evolving. Grace had done what no one else in that building had dared. She'd pulled the truth into daylight. He heard footsteps behind him. Margot. She didn't say anything at first, just stood by the bookshelf, arms crossed. You could have stopped her, she said finally. I didn't want to. Margot's lips tightened. She just made enemies we've spent years keeping quiet. No, Ronan said. She gave them something to believe in. Margot turned toward him, something unreadable in her eyes. And what about the board? They're watching. But for the first time, I think they're listening too. A long silence. Then she's not going to fold, is? Ronan shook his head. No. And that's exactly why she matters. Margot stepped closer, her voice quieter now. You love her? He didn't answer right away. Then I do. Margot's expression didn't soften, but the edges lost their sharpness. She glanced toward the window as if seeing something distant or remembering. She'll change everything she said. I hope so, Ronan replied. God, I hope so. Margot turned, walking away without another word. Ronan watched her go, then looked back at the skyline. Grace had started something today, and Charleston was finally paying attention. The sky over Charleston was painted in gold and rose as Grace walked the long brick path leading up to the Ashford estate. The press conference was behind her, the flood of reactions still unfolding online, but her thoughts weren't on headlines anymore. They were on him. She hadn't heard from Ronan since his message, and part of her worried. Not that he'd disappeared, but that everything they'd built might fracture under the weight of this truth. Her heels clicked softly against the stone as she stepped onto the wide veranda. Before she could knock, the door opened. Ronan. No suit. No tie. Just him, sleeves rolled, top button undone, like the tension had finally cracked through his polished armor. They stood in silence for a moment. Then he stepped aside. Come in. She hesitated, then crossed the threshold. The house was quiet. Still. The kind of stillness that comes after something breaks but before anyone knows how to pick up the pieces. Ronan led her into the drawing room, where soft light spilled across the floor. No one else was home. Or maybe no one else wanted to be. I watched the whole thing, he said, voice low. Twice. She tried to smile. And I felt every word. Grace exhaled. She hadn't realized she'd been holding her breath. I didn't mean to speak for you, she said. Or against your family. But I had to say something. I had to be clear about who I am. He stepped closer. You were more than clear. You were honest. Fierce. You said everything I couldn't. Her eyes searched his. Are you okay? He gave a soft laugh. No, but for once that feels like progress. Grace walked toward the fireplace, her fingers brushing the mantel. Your mother won't forgive me. She's not supposed to, Ronan said. She's supposed to reckon with you. Grace turned. And what about Sabrina? He didn't blink. She's gone. She left. He nodded. Tried to corner me at a board event this morning. Thought she could still spin this back into place, polish up the narrative, and step back into the spotlight. I told her no. Grace looked down. Was it hard? Ronan stepped forward. Yes. Because for so long, I let people like her. People like my mother decide what made me valuable, what made me worthy. He paused, reaching for her hand. But not anymore. She looked at their joined hands. So what now? That depends, he said, eyes searching hers. Are you still pretending to be my wife at dinner parties, or are we past pretending? Her breath caught. Her heart ached with the weight of all they'd been through. I don't want to play a part, she whispered. Not for anyone. Then don't, he said. Just be here. With me. As you are. A quiet moment passed. Then she leaned in, resting her forehead against his. The closeness wasn't urgent. It was steady, intentional, like two people choosing the same story, one page at a time. You still have a storm coming, she murmured. I know. And I'm not running from it, she added. But I won't drown in it either. His voice was barely above a whisper. Then we'll build higher ground. They stood there, two people no longer pretending, no longer performing, just breathing in the stillness after the fight. And for the first time, it felt like peace was possible. Not perfect, but real. The boardroom was quieter than usual, but the silence didn't feel like calm. It felt like a fuse waiting to be lit. Ronan sat at the head of the table. Tie-loosened eyes sharp. To his right sat Grace, composed, confident, the only woman in the room who didn't flinch when the door opened. Margot Ashford entered with her usual grace, but her posture held something different this time. Restraint, not dominance. The power in the room had shifted. She knew it. Everyone did. She took her seat, slowly setting down a leather folder, without a sound. Shall we begin, Chandler? Ever the pragmatist cleared his throat and spoke first. There's been a lot of press in the past few days, most of it not flattering. Truth rarely is, Grace said quietly. Chandler glanced at her, then looked away. No response. Another board member leaned forward. Let's talk about this audit proposal. External oversight. It sends a message we can't handle our own house. Ronan folded his hands. Or it sends a message we finally can. Margot didn't blink. You're asking the board to voluntarily open its doors to public scrutiny. Yes, Ronan replied. Because the public is why we exist. This company was built on legacy, but legacy means nothing if we let it rot from the inside. Silence again. Tighter this time. Grace slid a copy of the revised proposal toward the center of the table. These are the terms. A third-party audit focused solely on philanthropic disbursements, full transparency, full accountability. We work with the community, not above it. Another member, Ms. Patel, scanned the first page. This is comprehensive, and it includes restructured community liaisons. Yes, Grace said. People from the neighborhoods we serve. Voices that have been missing from this room for years. Patel nodded slowly. It's bold. It's overdue, Grace replied. Margot remained silent, unreadable. Then Chandler looked up. We vote, no one disagreed. The votes came in slowly, one by one. Some hesitant, some certain. One against, one abstained, but it passed. Grace didn't smile. Not yet. Victory, when it came, wasn't loud. It was quiet, rooted, real. As people gathered their things, Margot stood not speaking until the room had thinned. Then she looked at Grace. You've made your point, she said. Not cold, not warm. Just acknowledging. Grace met her eyes. It wasn't about a point. It was about the people you forgot. Margot tilted her head, studying her. You remind me of someone I used to be. Grace didn't flinch. Then maybe we're both still in there somewhere. Margot paused, then nodded once, just enough to mark the moment. Then she left. Ronan and Grace remained seated. That felt like a war we didn't know we were winning until it was over, he said, exhaling. Grace smiled faintly. It's not over. It's just cleaner now. He turned toward her. So what do we do with clean? She looked out the window, the late sun casting long shadows on the polished floor. We build. He reached for her hand gently. Together she laced her fingers with his. If we mean it, I do, he said, voice low. Outside the wind shifted. Inside something settled. And in that small, still space between old legacies and new beginnings, they sat not just as allies or lovers, but as co-authors of something neither of them could have imagined when this all began. Something real. The morning sun washed over Charleston in soft gold, spilling across cobblestone streets and rooftops still damp from the night's dew. Grace stood outside the modest brick building that would soon be the new Ashford Community Foundation headquarters. No brass plaques, no marble floors, just an old restored library filled with light and possibility. Ronan joined her on the steps, holding 2 paper cups of coffee from the cafe down the street. He handed her one without saying anything, then looked up at the freshly painted sign above the doors. Looks different in daylight, he said. Grace smiled. It's supposed to. They stood in silence for a moment, watching as a few volunteers carried in boxes, laughter echoing faintly through the open doors. She took a sip of coffee. Do you remember that first night, at the Italian place near the marina, when your mother pretended I was your wife? He laughed softly. I thought you were going to throw your napkin in her face. I nearly did. You were the only one in that room who didn't flinch, he said. I didn't know how rare that was until later. Grace looked down. I didn't know how tired I was of flinching until then. They both knew how far they'd come, not just through the headlines and board meetings and press conferences, but inside, where it mattered. Ronan turned toward her, voice quieter now. You saved this place. No, she said gently. We changed it. That's different. He took that in. Then, as if unable to hold back the question any longer, he asked, Do you ever regret it, not walking away? She looked at him. Every time I see my old life creeping up behind me, I do for a second. But then I remember why I stayed. He stepped closer. Why her eyes met his. Steady. Clear. Because this time I didn't lose myself to be part of something. I brought all of me into it. And for once that was enough. Ronan was quiet for a long time. Then he pulled something from his pocket, a key. She raised an eyebrow. It's yours, he said. To the office, to the house, to whatever we're building next. I don't care where it opens, as long as I'm standing beside you when it does. Her breath caught not from surprise, but from the simplicity of it. No rings, no speeches, she asked. Not yet, he said. Not unless you want one. She smiled, slow and warm. Let's just open the doors first. They walked up the steps together. Inside the building smelled like fresh paint and wood polish. The staff buzzed around tables, unpacking supplies, arranging welcome signs. It was messy, imperfect, alive. Gwen stood in the center, clipboard in hand, already managing logistics like her life depended on it. You're late, she called out. We're founders, Grace replied. Founders are never late. Gwen rolled her eyes, but the grin gave her away. As Ronan disappeared into the back to help move boxes, Grace walked to the main window, where the sunlight pooled across the worn hardwood floor. She could see her own reflection hair tied back, blazer sleeves, rolled sneakers instead of heels. This wasn't the woman who had dined alone to escape a headline. This was the woman who rewrote it. A voice behind her pulled her back. You ready, Grace? Turned. Ronan stood in the doorway, dust on his sleeve, eyes tired but bright. She nodded. They stepped outside, facing the group of kids and families beginning to gather out front. Volunteers, donors, neighbors, people who'd heard about a place that wanted to listen. Grace took a breath and reached for the handle, and together they opened the door. Not to a company, not to a legacy, but to something new, something earned, something honest. And in the quiet that followed, Grace knew with all her doubts, her grit, her hard-earned hope, that this was the kind of story worth staying in.